I do, I have run into people who said, they're spying on me, and I put aluminum foil around my windows to keep people from spying on me. And normally at my office, we'll go, yes, okay, we understand, but the police aren't really spying on you. I can't tell them that anymore, because the facts of the matter are, they could be. Okay, now we're gonna start with questions. Okay, so I see one question here.
Thank you very much for the information, great. The way I kind of view it is, the world is changing now that you have a faceless J. Edgar Hoover. That's basically what it is. They couldn't get rid of Edgar Hoover. 50 years, 60 years he was in office, they couldn't get rid of him, that way to die. This is the same thing, but it's faceless. And so, I kind of look at it both ways. I've been watching whether it is. What I see where it's going to head is, yeah, they'll pass this law, but this law is going to take all the data and move it to private firms. So they're going to get it. They're still getting the data. Third-party companies are going to get it, which I think is even worse. I'd rather government have the data than these third-party companies, personally. But, I can't see especially after 9/11, especially with the technology the way it is now, how you guys can come at it. I understand you can say you can get the community and everything like that. I think that the momentum is just too strong, and the way things are now, the way society has accepted it, it's just part of life. And I'll give you one example. Every night I put my 10-month-old, 11-month-old to sleep. Okay? And I use technology. There's a camera sitting above his crib. Okay? And am I watching what he's doing? Absolutely. We're watching every minute when we're working and he's sleeping. Am I invading his privacy? Absolutely. No questions asked. I'm invading his privacy. I'm watching what as he's doing. It's not malevolent. It's in case he's choking or anything like that, we can get in there and ask right away. But this is what's going to happen, and that's what I'm asking. How can you possibly combat that momentum? That momentum is so powerful.
Sure. So I think there's a really important thing that we're talking about here, and I'm sorry I wasn't very specific. I'm talking about bulk surveillance of everyone. He's talking about surveilling one infant.
No,
I'm talking about surveilling every infant, all infants, your infants, his infants. How would you feel if he was surveilling his infant? Probably not so good. So I know it's not a perfect metaphor. It's not a perfect metaphor. But I do want to be very clear that we have constitutional protections that are supposed to stop people from collecting things on people who aren't suspected of any crime. Law enforcement is going to use technology. Technology is going to help them do their jobs better. So is the NSA. But what we don't want is that technology turned against innocent, law-abiding people who are not suspected of any crime. And I also want to say that you raised a really important point, which is about, okay, we're talking about the NSA. How does that affect or influence or interact with the very interesting role of all these companies that are not the government that are collecting our personal information? And that's like a whole different conversation to have, because Fourth Amendment protections that we have do not apply to the collection of information by private companies.
Maybe the collection of information from private companies.
Absolutely.
And
that, and it's an unsettled area of law, honestly. It really is, and it's a real concern. But one thing we're trying to do in the NSA debates is prevent the government from forcing private companies to collect information. So what we don't want to see, and what I'm not sure we won't see, one of the things we're worried about is that as a result of this big controversy, all these leaks, the government says, well, okay, well, we're not going to collect it anymore, and then turns around and says, private companies, you must collect it, you must maintain it, you must make it searchable, and you must make it available to the government, and then we haven't won anything. And that's one of the things I'm super worried about. You want to add?
Oh, yes. I'd say there are a couple of things. As Rainey said, one of the big differences is this generalized search. The other mentality that we're fighting against is we'll collect all the data now and then figure out why we need it later. Mm-hmm. And that is a real difference. You're watching your infant. I have an 8-month-old. I wish mine slept at night and tends to be awake during the night. But there's a purpose for having a camera on an infant, and it is you have a specific idea in mind. If you're tracking an 8-year-old or an 18-year-old with a camera, now you're just trying to figure out what they're doing, and it's kind of curiosity, and that's not, our government shouldn't be curious about individuals and watching individuals' activities. That really undermines, again, it inverts the role of government. Government is our servant, not our master, not our superior. You're in charge of your child for at least some number of years. Not to say they have no rights, but 10 months, 11 months, monitoring them doesn't seem to raise, we're not gonna sue you for it, don't worry. So another point I'll raise is actually, although the Fourth Amendment only applies to the government, as Rainey said, California's Constitution actually has a privacy provision that does apply to private companies. So private companies have some, not terribly well-defined, requirements to respect individuals' privacy. One of the recent cases actually involved the San Francisco Giants. AT&T Park was searching people on entry, and the people filed a complaint under the California Constitution saying this was a violation of their privacy, and won. Or negotiated, Giants said, boy, this is bad press, we're going to stop that practice. But there are some rights there. But the bigger right is really in the consumer space. And what we have seen in response to the NSA is companies are actually trying to differentiate themselves on the basis of privacy more, while also trying to collect and monetize information. There's a very interesting balance there. But for example, one of the things the NSA has been known to do is intercept information between data centers. So Google has centers in Europe and centers in the US, and as far as we can tell, someone is tapping into the fiber optic line that carries data between them, had been unencrypted, and is sucking it all up. Now Google is encrypting all of that, and more companies are thinking about security and ways they can protect information from all kinds of surveillance. But they're also thinking about how can they push back, and in some cases they're actually using the law, as Rainey said and is very clear, the law is very murky here. The challenge is that means government can come in and say, give us this information, we don't need a warrant, and maybe they're right. But if a company says, we're not going to come back with a warrant or take us to court, so far the government has either come back with a warrant or gone away. Because they don't want to lose that court case. They're happy with fuzzy law in this circumstance, which gives companies the opportunity to actually push back. To say, look, the law is not clear whether or not you can demand that we do this, so we're going to say you can't, or we want a law that actually, we want a court case at least that spells it out, because we're going to stand up for our users. And that is really a powerful thing, partly because if you can shut down Google and Facebook and Yahoo and Skype as sources of information, it really changes the dynamic for the NSA, partly because lawmakers listen to companies too, and when they're upset, in many ways, companies and citizens working from the same perspective can be a really effective combination.
Thank you. There was a question there.
Following up on the previous question, there are a lot of interacting dimensions of this that you're sort of chasing a hydra here. The aspect of tracking metadata, or I guess they're considering that business records, people don't understand how big data works, so it's becoming the algorithms that the commercial enterprises have created in recent years have made it such that metadata is very useful from a surveillance perspective. So when you combine that with the fact that that FIS court or someone in the last 10 or 7 years decided that you don't go to that court just to say a specific warrant of a specific case of a specific person. Somebody flipped the switch and said, all the business records. So the combination of those two things, it's just business records, but it's this juicy metadata which is becoming more and more analyzable to determine really specific information about people. Plus, somebody, whether it was you or Bybee or some bureaucrat in the DOJ said, oh, go to the FIS court not just to focus on a specific case of interest, but surveil the whole damn country. I mean, obviously you guys are trying to probe into how that happened, who did it, and maybe undo it, or are you not? I mean, like...
In the other order, we'd like to undo it first.
I mean, that's sort of a nexus of nastiness, right?
Absolutely. And this is actually one of our frustrations with the current administration. After months of pushback, Obama said, oh, actually, I think it's a good idea. We should revise our current program that is collecting metadata. So I'm going to write a legislative proposal. He's the president. The NSA is an executive agency. He could stop this tomorrow if he wanted to. This is one of the real complaints.
He's slow walking it.
What's that?
He's slow walking it.
Sure.
He wants to.
But I mean, this is one of the points of pressure that we're pushing on. But there are, as Rainey said, the USA Freedom Act actually does curtail not only this specific metadata program, but a broad set of metadata programs. Because there's been evidence that there's at least some other metadata program ongoing that Obama has not said nothing about shutting down. He's talked about shutting down the telephone metadata program, but there's something else. It doesn't seem to be internet collection, because that was apparently shut down in 2011 after extensive evidence that even the this court rejected applications saying you're actually abusing this. But there's some other metadata program that is still extant, or at least there's evidence of that. So we definitely want to see metadata writ large given protection. And ideally, we'd rather see it have constitutional protection than statutory protection, because if we can work through issues about, as you said, metadata has become not just a bunch of data that you can't do anything with, but something that paints a robust picture of your life. We can win a legal fight, hopefully once and for all. There was a recent Supreme Court case, United States versus Jones, it was about location tracking. But one of the key, location is a form of metadata in a certain sense. It gets very fuzzy when you talk about metadata, where location falls, but it certainly is, it's not content of a communication, it's not the words you say, but it can paint a robust picture. And 5 of the justices, although not the 5 that were the majority opinion, so it's not the binding law, seemed to say tracking someone for a month without a warrant was unconstitutional because it's so invasive into their life. One of them, Justice Sotomayor, actually directly said this whole third-party doctrine thing seems stupid today. We need to rethink it. So we're hopeful that we can actually get the Supreme Court to say, look, we need modern interpretation of the Fourth Amendment. We need a good law that says, look, doing things that mine massive amounts of information is different than targeting on a single individual. Collecting lots of information about one person is different than seeing them once on the street. We need to have new laws and new interpretations that understand that. I think that is, to us, both the you shouldn't be doing this, but also how we get a more final solution. But certainly the starting point would be, Obama or the USA Freedom Act or something that actually shuts down the programs we know are going on now while we continue the bigger picture conversation.
Okay, is there another question? Anyone? Oh, well, we'll try to get as many right as possible.
So we've got this whole situation with the Mayor's Tech Council and the Internet of Things and the whole Resilient Cities movement, which is going to computerize an awful lot of our public services in ways that are, there's no way for them to be transparent, even to a lot of people in tech. And there's this whole issue of the ability to build in really abusive systems towards disabilities and other vulnerable people. So is there any way that we can actually get the people at the NSA and the Justice Department to actually care about innocent and defenseless people and help them, like people who are victims of prostitution or various fraud scandals? Because it seems like they're collecting all of this data and they're not helping any of the people who are actually being victimized by crime.
You want to handle it?
I'll take a stab. So that's a hard question. Well, I mean, one of the challenges here again is that we have safeguards around with the NSA. The NSA has a purpose, and they have a national security purpose, and that is extremely important. We may want them to have authority to do things that ordinary law enforcement could not. But if we say, well, and then you can hand it over to ordinary law enforcement, then it becomes really easy for Joe Sheriff to say, hey, buddy in the NSA, can you look at this for me? And then our safeguards around law enforcement erode. So it is challenging to say, well, we're going to collect all this information for, and make it fair game for, run-of-the-mill law enforcement stuff. It's really hard. It would be socially valuable if you could help, people who are victims of various crimes with this global collection of information. But it is, in our opinion, is outweighed by the erosion of civil liberties that would come from making that fair game for all sorts of purposes.
Yeah.
The abuses.
Think about a kid who's trapped in prostitution in a whorehouse. That person, there's 13th Amendment issues as well going on there. Well, I think that there'd be a big public interest.
There certainly is. There's a public interest in fighting crime. That doesn't mean that the police are the citizens' masters, so that they can do anything they need to fight crime. They can't break into everyone's house to see if you're growing up, actually marijuana is a fuzzy issue, but see if you have cocaine in your house. That's clearly illegal. That doesn't mean they can break into any house because they might find cocaine. They do a wild goose chase, and then maybe it becomes not quite a wild goose chase. I don't like the Arab community, so I'm going to break into their houses in particular, see if some of them have coke. Or I'm going to go after the people who voted Democrat in the last election because I'm a Republican, or all sorts of things. It's really hard to say we can target this crime without collateral damage on our democratic principles. It's not to say that I wouldn't wish for a world where we could, but I am yet to be convinced that we can really craft a system that allows looking at specific cases without creating a lot of danger.
And I would just add, sorry, let me just throw one more thing in, and I think you would actually make this point better than I would, but I'm going to try it anyway, is that, we have seen a long history of police powers and surveillance powers being turned against communities that are already vulnerable. And this is something the ACLU has worked on for a very long time. EFF has done some work on as well. that the idea that when faced with abusive situations or problems, that the answer is to give more authority to the police without proper oversight, without proper transparency, actually, I don't think that's the solution. When our police and when our government is failing to crack down on crimes that we're concerned about, I think most of the time it's because they're not using the authorities that they already have.
Which I will add one good example to that, which is we've been fighting it, and the New York police have long had a program where they were monitoring Islamic communities. They were tracking people coming and going from mosques. They were infiltrating circles to figure out what they were buying and what they were doing and who was talking to who. They did this for a decade. They got nothing out of it. They looked at this and said there were no investigative leads whatsoever. In the meantime, the Muslim community completely shut out the police because they didn't view them as allies, as protectors. They viewed them as spies, as infiltrators, as people who were undermining the integrity of their community. And so again, it's not just saying we have this tech surveillance tool, it could prevent this crime. It can actually make the situation worse in some circumstances. And that at least needs to be added to the calculus if you're talking about we can address this crime, because driving, more surveillance can drive things further underground, can cut down other lines of communication that could be much more effective in fighting crime in the first place.
Just the last point. Jimmy Carter was just here talking about how the government can figure out all the houses of prostitution in Atlanta, and exactly which cops are looking the other way. So wouldn't it make sense to be able to get this information to try to figure out who the bad cops are and which departments are looking the other way in all these really heinous crimes? Isn't this a really great opportunity to figure out exactly what's going wrong with law enforcement?
Do you want me to?
Sure. It would be wonderful if we could do that without entailing any risks that the data be used for improper purposes. But to say that there's I can't say that it would be great to do that. It would be great to do that, yes. It would be great if we could use technology to make sure that law enforcement is doing their job without side effects. The side effects can be fatal to democracy. And so we have to at least look at those and to just address what could positively come from technology without looking at what could come negatively. I mean, that's where, one of the things in the privacy movement, we kind of have compared it to the environmental movement. And for a long time, the environmental movement was the crazy radical fringe because we had industry and it was creating all sorts of great things. And we had plastics and we had power and we had all this stuff. Oh, and then people started getting sick. There were these side effects and it was really hard to link things together until there was a lot more research. And then we found out, boy, those policies were bad. Even setting aside climate change and all the controversy, fake controversy, whatever around that, there's no question that industrial pollutants have killed lots and lots of people. And we have changed how we regulate industry because of that. Even though industry creates good things, it still needs to be, individuals still need protection from the consequences. The same thing can be true of technology. Technology can do great things, but if we just deploy it willy-nilly, focus on what it does that's positive, without thinking about what it does that's harmful, we're not doing ourselves, we're not, as a society, we are likely to run into some very harmful side effects.
Okay, thank you very much. And Tom, you'll get the last
Oh,
question.
the last question. I guess this is for Rainey. You talk about the U.S. Freedom Act. Is that what
USA
it's called?
Freedom Act, right?
Could you explain to me exactly what that would do concerning the problem with the storage and use or abuse of metadata? I mean, this guy said it would just go into the private companies,
Yep.
and he had a concern about that. But I'd like your response to his concern. Is that what the U.S. Freedom Act? And number two, who's sponsoring it in the House and Senate?
Okay, who is sponsoring this? Is it, it's bipartisan. So I think Sensenbrenner, who is the original author of the Patriot Act, is one of the sponsors. And Leahy, I know, it's very interesting. And Leahy is a sponsor. But I think there's like 150 other sponsors. I don't know them all. So the USA Freedom Act is going to do a whole bunch of things. The first thing it does is it changes the language of Section 215 of the Patriot Act. Remember the business record section, the thing that they're using to get all of your phone metadata? It changes it and makes it a lot stronger. And it's now, what it doesn't do, honestly, is say that under no circumstances shall the government ever collect metadata on anybody. Instead, it heightens the legal standard significantly, and it is attempting to make it so that the government can collect metadata on a person, but not on every person, right? So that's the needle it's trying to thread. It's trying to make it impossible for them to use Section 215 to engage in mass surveillance. So you could still, again, you know, the camera on the internet metaphor, you could still do it for an individual, but not for all telephones. And so that's the needle it's trying to thread, and I think it's doing a fairly good job of it. It would also limit, so one of the things the NSA does is it collects all of this information on people, it throws it into a big database, and it may, for example, have collected your internet communications, and maybe it didn't mean to, or maybe it just accidentally did it, or maybe it did mean it to, but whatever, it's in the database now. It would make it more difficult for the NSA to go back and search that information for the information, search that database for the information of Americans. It does have a slightly problematic section to it, which is called about surveillance. So one of the things that the NSA can do is it's able to collect up information between terrorist A and terrorist B. Right? But let's say I was writing an email to Chris and I happen to mention terrorist A in that email. Or maybe something not even really related to terrorist A, but they just decided it was kind of like terrorist A, so they're going to throw it into their bad list of words. They would decide that since my email mentioned a topic relatively related to something they thought they were interested in, it would be a type of surveillance that they could collect. They call it about surveillance about what they're trying to get. And so one of the sections of USA Freedom that we're trying to get removed is they actually would mention that specifically in the law. Right now they're doing it, but it's not written into the law anywhere, they're just doing it anyway, and so I think we'd want to get that removed. It would create a special advocate in the FISA court. So remember I talked about how the FISA court has just the judge and the government. This would mean a person in the court who actually stood there and said, I think what you're doing has privacy ramifications, and I want you to think about the civil liberties consequences. So one other person in that court who's a special advocate who stands up for privacy and makes an argument. And it would also take, so the FISA court, all the decisions that they make about interpretations of the law, it would make it so that the Attorney General would every year provide an annual report about what those significant decisions were. That's an incredibly important transparency measure. It's something that Obama, even at this point, has said is the right thing to do. And then it would also, are any of you familiar with national security letters? Of hands. Okay, so national security letters are a legal instrument that is used to collect records from businesses here within the United States, and it's been it's increasingly used. I think a particularly troublesome usage of it was when they were concerned about potential activity in Los Angeles, and they decided they wanted to get all of the hotel records of everybody who stayed in Los Angeles over one particular New Year's. So national security letters are a very vague legal instrument that is used to collect records from a business entity. They come with a gag order, so that if you get a national security letter, you can't tell anybody. You can't ever speak about it. And this results in the fact that we don't know how many, it's very hard for us to see how they are getting abused. So it would add a slight improvement to national security letters, so that if Chris received a national security letter, he could say, I'm concerned about this, please go get a judge to sign off on it. And then that person would have to go get a judge to sign off on it, rather than just having the FBI sign off on the thing themselves. So I guess what I'm trying to say about the USA Freedom Act is I think it does a whole bunch of wonderful things. If I were writing a piece of legislation, I would make it a lot stronger, but this is by far the strongest, most impressive piece of legislation. It's a come out of NSA controversy. Do you want to add anything? I know it does a couple of other things.
I know it less than you do, because I'm not the national person.
Got it. It also gives subpoena power to the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board, and it has some more transparency components, but those are less important. So those are the main things it does, I would say.
Okay, well listen, thank you very much. Please give me a big round of applause.